Hello, everyone. I'm really excited. This is our first podcast, or my first podcast that I'm doing on my own. This is Real Talk with Amber, and this is a place we're going to come to talk about all things, really. Spirituality. We're going to talk about death. We're going to talk about sexuality. We're going to talk about religion. We're going to talk about politics. Basically, anything and everything that society doesn't want to talk about, we're going to talk about here, and we're going to do it in a respectful and loving way, in a loving environment, and in a way that hopefully will allow people to really feel empowered to become more of who they really are instead of who society wants them to be, or who their family wants them to be, for that matter. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining. And we're going to bring on Angela here in just a moment. All right, everybody. Thank you. This is our first official podcast with Real Talk with Amber. I'm Amber. And today I have with me Angela Hershey, who is the founder of My Massage and Wellness. And she's also an end-of-life doula and massage therapist that specializes in hospice and grief. And she also does some massage for grief. And we're just going to talk a little bit about today about what you do, how grief shows up in your body, and just a lot about grief, especially since, the holidays are coming up with Thanksgiving and Christmas and, Hanukkah. A lot of people are facing their first holiday without their loved one, which is always really tough. And having been someone who lost their mother at an early age, she was 50 when I passed, and I was only 31, it's still hard to face the holidays. Christmas was her favorite time of year. So we just want to equip people. It's not going to be easy, no matter what advice we give you, no matter what we share with you today, but maybe something that will help you get through it a little bit easier. So with that, I just want to welcome Angela Hershey. Hi, Ange.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Amber.
Hi. Angela is one of my very best friends. We connected almost immediately a few years ago. So I just want to start off talking about, grief through the holidays and the different kinds of grief that we might be facing through the holidays. I know you and I have talked extensively about like anticipatory grief, what that looks like, and then, actually going through the grief process after someone has passed.
Yeah, we will definitely touch on a lot of different points. But like you mentioned, it's never easy, no matter how much, quote unquote, and I use advice loosely because I think it's important that we don't give advice to people who are in grief. The most important thing is just to remain present. So I might just talk a little bit about, my experience with, grief and loss, just to kind of touch on why I do what I do, and then what it is that I do and kind of what led me into this work. So I come from a really small family, which I think a lot of people can kind of relate to. So when you have someone in your family with a terminal illness, as a caregiver, you are faced with a lot more responsibilities, and it can be really overwhelming. So I think that was our challenge as a family. My mom was diagnosed with small cell lung cancer when I was in high school. She was only 45. So she went through the chemo and radiation, and kind of like what we're going to talk about later about that anticipatory grief period. I think a lot of people face that sometimes during those treatment times, and you're going back and forth through hospitals and doctor's appointments, and you're seeing this person sort of unfortunately deteriorate a little bit. So, we didn't have a lot of guidance with her prognosis, I feel like, and a lot of what occurred took us by surprise. It was like every new decline, she had really bad nausea. Her body was just not handling the treatments well. And it was really terrifying for us, especially for me, because, I was the only child. I have a little brother who was 6 years old at the time, and he's disabled. So we were struggling with how to kind of manage him because she was his primary caregiver. So that added on to the sort of overwhelm and the fear. And I think, families have to deal with more than one thing at a time. There's a million and one added stressors to when you have somebody who's sick in your life, and
I,
you're trying to keep up with everything.
I think that's important to recognize too, is
Yeah.
that, everybody, I mean, I know this firsthand, again, going back to my story, is that, you kind of expect the world to stop
Right.
when you're going through this. But the truth of the matter is that life does march on. Even in your own life, you have to keep taking one step forward. As much as you want to stay in that pain and just wallow in it. I mean, I hate to
Yeah,
use the word.
because we're trying to process so much at once. And so that's really what led me to this work. Unfortunately, my mom was in and out of the hospital, in and out of the ER, which is horrible. The hospital is no place to die. And it's not that, some people have to do it that way. A lot of people do pass away in the hospital, but my point is, it doesn't have to be that way. It should be a choice with the patient and the family. And obviously it depends on your unique circumstances and your situation and the support system that you have in place at home or with a hospice or whatever. But we were not given any sort of guidance or choice. So she was in and out of the hospital. Like I said, I was 18, and I was just raising heck with the doctors and nurses because she was uncomfortable. We knew she was terminal at this point. And so I just, for the life of me, couldn't understand why they weren't doing everything they could just to keep her comfortable. So I literally ended up going home and looking up hospice in the phone book back in the day when we used a phone book and there wasn't like a Google search. I couldn't, read reviews or like anything like that. I just kind of went on faith, and I don't even know how I knew what hospice was, other than briefly hearing my mom talk about it, because she actually during her illness wanted to get better and become a hospice nurse, ironically.
Wow.
So I don't believe in coincidence. I do believe that has a lot to do with where I'm at. But, so they got involved, and she got into an inpatient hospice facility called the Hospice of the Western Reserve in Cleveland, Ohio. And she passed away exactly 14 days later.
Mm.
So it was just like a whirlwind. So yeah, and there, and like we were saying, there's a lot of compounding issues that happen after the loss, how to find care for my disabled brother and all of these things that just compounded. So as an end of life doula, my primary goal is to meet the patient and the family wherever they are in their process. And, I ask a lot of questions. I try to find out how knowledgeable they are about the disease process, um, make sure that they have support systems in place. Do they have hospice yet? Have they explored that option yet? Because a lot of times they haven't,
Mhm.
because, people don't really understand what hospice is. And it's like the H word. It's as bad as the death word is the H word. It's like, don't say hospice, don't say death. So it can be a really hard thing to realize for people that this is something that eventually will have to be discussed.
It's an
So it's
actualization,
hard.
I think, that a lot of people have to come to. Like, this means it's actually happening.
Yeah.
There's a lot that goes into it. With the H word, there's a lot that goes into it where you're like, okay, I have to accept this now. This is
Yeah.
really happening.
Yeah. And it's not like I I struggle with the word acceptance, because it's like, yeah, we're sort of accepting it, but we're also still in denial. So
Mhm.
this is that, again, these are stages of the anticipatory grief where we're in denial, shock, anger, fear.
Mhm.
We're trying to bargain maybe with God or with the doctors to still, if only they would do X, Y, Z, then maybe they could pull through this, or whatever the case may be.
So with anticipatory grief, I can just give a little bit of information about my own story with my
Yeah,
mom,
I'd like you to.
um, because we went through her last Christmas, and everybody knew it. She knew it, that this was going to be it. This was the last Christmas, and I remember even going through and going Christmas shopping with her. She went to her favorite Bible bookstore and, started purchasing things that she thought held some meaning to it, things that we could hold on to and cherish.
Oh,
Um,
beautiful.
I mean, I still remember every last step and every item that she picked up because I was like, take it all in, take it all in. So, I remember looking over at my mom on Christmas Day as we're unwrapping our gifts and looking at her, and I could feel it coming from her. There was just this immense amount of pain, like emotional pain, where she came to realize that this is it. Like, this was her time of year. And I'm sure a lot of the people who are going to be watching this can relate to that. Like, Christmas was her holiday. And so I've carried that tradition forward and really kind of taken it on as my own. Um, and, in that moment, I felt so much pain, both for myself and realizing that I was going to be losing a very important person in my life. And I felt her pain as well. Being an empath, you take on
Right.
so much from everyone surrounding you. So I guess, with that, and I know that, you've had your own experience with your mom. Your mom had just gone into remission at Christmas time and then was
Yeah.
re-diagnosed, I believe, back or the next February, I think you
It
said.
was, yeah, so it was 2004, the holiday of '04, which was the year I graduated high school. She went into a remission. And I think people can relate to, it's like you think you're out of the woods in a sense. And then so I think we had a nice holiday. I have some really beautiful pictures of my mom and my little brother Max. Um, my mom had lost all her hair. She was really thin. I mean, she still looked really sick.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she was just starting, in her healing, essentially her healing process,
Mm-hmm.
um, in between her treatment. And yeah, and then she was re-diagnosed. She felt a lump on her spine, and it had come back in her spine. And they say typically when that happens, their prognosis isn't very good.
Mm-hmm.
I think she did have a few more rounds of chemo and radiation, which, like I said, that's what really ultimately took her off the deep edge. And yeah, but yeah, for those few days, or well, Thanksgiving, and we just did an easy takeout meal. She didn't cook. We did like that Boston Market, and just kept it really simple and easy. And I have some pictures of that, which I really cherish. Those are some of my favorite pictures too. And
Yeah.
I think, yeah, just coming together as a family, and it just means, it just takes on a whole new meaning when somebody's going through that.
Yeah. And, I can say my non-professional advice, I guess, would be just take in every moment that you can with that person. Try not to focus so much on, the sickness or the dying aspect of it. It's hard because there is this actualization that we're in this process, but you want really good memories to hold on to. And if this is the last Christmas or the last Thanksgiving with that someone, just, man, make it a special Christmas. Make it something that's memorable that you're always going to remember. So,
Yeah,
and
take
you
video.
know,
Take a ton of pictures. Do
yeah,
video. Have them, write some letters. Get around. If it's Thanksgiving, I think handwriting is so beautiful. Everybody, obviously speaking what you're thankful for, but having something that they've written down if they're able to, and sometimes they might not be able to. But the video, there's just a lot of things that we can do. And this is, as a doula, what I help give families ideas about, is
mhm,
just giving suggestions about things that they can do, because sometimes they're in such a survival mode that they're really not thinking about that stuff. So it's so wonderful that there's so many things that you did back then that I'm sure you look back, and because I think the same thing with our situation. I look back and I think, how the heck did I manage all of that in that situation? I felt like I was just in survival mode a
yes.
lot of the time,
And
just trying to make it through the next moment, let alone plan about all these things to do.
and your mom passed in 2004. My mom passed in 2008. Is that right? Was it
Mine was
2004, 2005?
so it was the following summer in '05. Yeah,
So
so it was way
3 years
back in the
apart. And
yeah.
during that time, we didn't have cell phones available that could capture video and photos
Right.
the way that we can now. So now that that's, readily available, use it for sure.
Yes.
So moving on into kind of just, your work, which by the way, Angela is located in Indianapolis. She is going to be offering some really cool workshops and other things that we'll talk about towards the end of the podcast. But for now, I just want to talk about how we acknowledge grief in our society. There are a number of things that we can talk about, as you and I have spoken about at quite a bit of length, from time off of work after someone passes away, how to approach people in the workplace or friends or family. So if we can just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, even outside of the holiday season, if you're struggling with someone if you're yourself grieving, you can feel like you're almost like on a different planet, I think. And that's kind of how I envision it, is you feel like you live over here and everybody else is going about their life. Like sometimes you might wake up and be like, how is everybody just living when my loved one is not here, and I'm in such a deep state of suffering. That I think is one of the really hardest things, is there's a deep sense of isolation and withdrawal from, friends and family, because you may just not want to talk about it because it's too hard. There's a lot of triggers, and especially around the holidays, I think social media can be a big trigger, because everybody else is, hanging out with their loved one and, baking cookies and going shopping and putting up the tree, or, planning Thanksgiving. And there's a lot of pressure to be happy. Everybody else is happy, but I am so not happy. I am in a deep state of pain. And so I think that can bring up a lot of feelings to, guilty feelings and shameful feelings. So I just think it's really important to give yourself compassion during that time, and to know that you're not crazy. You probably feel like you're crazy, and that's completely normal too. It's normal to feel crazy, and to be angry and sad and depressed, and all of these things need to be validated.
And so just quickly, I have gone through some grief counseling through the hospice center that my mom went with after she passed away. They offered a grief group that I did go through. It was super helpful. So can you talk a little bit about the stages of grief for people who may not have lost someone yet?
Yeah, and it's funny, because not funny at all, but I remember back when I was in my grief process, I did not go through any counseling. So good on you for taking advantage of that. I don't know. Some people just don't, because they think they got, I got this or whatever. I'll just do it my way, and I did it my way. It took me a lot longer maybe, but yeah. So the stages are, and they do not go in order at all. You can bounce from one to another, and it's almost like a cyclical thing. It's a process, it's a feeling and a process, but more so a process. So it's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And there's a book, Claire, and I can't remember her last name right now, but that she's written a book that anxiety is the sixth stage of grief that is not really talked about. And I resonated with that really deeply. Anxiety was a huge issue for me, and I think it is for a lot of people. I was afraid to leave the house at some points, and I couldn't explain why. It felt completely irrational. So, and I didn't have the knowledge that I do now back then, because again, I didn't go through any sort of professional counseling. And I remember looking at the stages of grief, and because I think we were given a booklet by hospice, some literature to read. And I distinctly remember being really angry about these stages of grief, because I thought that they were saying it had to be in order. And I remember looking at the stages thinking, well, I am nowhere near acceptance. Okay. Like, I am so angry. I am just angry.
Yeah.
And that's where I was. So I think it's just important to note that it is not a step 1, 2, 3 done. I mean, it comes up in waves. And when I did my extra training for grief massage, we were given a really beautiful analogy of this snow globe. Grief is like a snow globe. And triggers seeing a even going to the grocery store. For me, it was going to the grocery store where my mom and I would go grocery shopping. I remember breaking down into tears at an Aldi's in the chocolate aisle because, because we would always buy the same brand of chocolate, and I still buy it to this day. But I just couldn't take it. And so that was like shaking up the snow globe. That's what it feels like. And then, some time goes by and it settles down again. But then something else happens, a reminder, and it's shaken up again. So I just think that's a really kind of beautiful analogy to think about it.
It's okay even years later because I'm still grieving.
Yeah.
So it's been 11 years now, which is crazy to me since my mom has passed away. Because if anyone knew my mom, and maybe some of you who are watching did know my mom, you know that she was this larger than life personality. And I always said to everyone, it's funny, she always said, I'm going to die before both of my sisters. And she did.
Wow.
So that goes to the power of words, right?
Yeah.
The power our words have. She literally would have her eldest sister practice somewhere over the rainbow for her funeral. That was her plan.
Wow.
Yeah. And sure enough, that's how it played out. But I always said, my mom is such a big personality. She's never going to go away.
Well, her spirit has not gone away.
No, not at all.
Her energy is definitely still around you.
Absolutely. So all that to say, even if you believe that your mother is still with you in, the spirit world, or if she's in heaven or whatever your belief is, sure, that can provide some comfort, but the truth of the matter is we're living a human experience, and our human experience tells us that we suffered a loss, and that's a very real loss. And so it's okay, even 10, 20, 30 years later, to mourn for that loss. It's okay.
Right. It never goes away.
Right.
And anybody that tells you to get over it, just ignore them.
Yes.
Please. They're well-meaning, and we'll talk about more about, what people say, well-intentioned, but that is not helpful. So we're going to give some messages to friends and family or coworkers that, know someone who's had a loss or is going through a loss in some way, sort of what to do and what not to do. Because a lot of people just don't know. They're not bad people. They're not trying to not be helpful, but.
And this is a perfect transition into that. So that's called, I think, platitudes, right? Like, people who approach you after a loved one has passed away with, like you said, the best of intentions, and it might sound good in their mind, but when it hits the person who is grieving, it hits them right in the gut or right in the heart, and that's not what they need. So you can just talk to what some of those platitudes are that people use and what they can use instead, because it's one thing to say, don't do that. So what do we replace it?
Yeah. So platitudes are things like, well, they're in a better place now. At least they're no longer suffering. Just smile. Don't you love that one? It's the holidays. Just smile. Let's just do something else to distract ourselves, or just obviously get over it. It was 10 years ago, Amber, or 11 years ago. You should really get over it.
Yeah.
And so whether it was yesterday, or it's happening soon, or if it was 25 years ago, if you're still seeing signs of mourning, please refrain from saying those things. And again, I know they're well-intentioned. And the reason why people say these things are because it's the friend or the individual saying those things that are uncomfortable, because we don't know what to do. And so my advice is that it's okay to not know what to say or do. Just say, wow, Amber, I don't know what to say. That must be really hard. do you want to talk about it? And let them lead.
Yeah.
Always let the griever lead in the conversation because they might not want to talk about it,
Yeah.
and that's okay.
Absolutely. If I can give one of the examples, I know you and I have talked about this, but a very close friend of mine just recently lost someone she loves very much. And instead of it being about me, because, oftentimes we're like, what can I do? Can I be there for you? Can I bring you food? Can I da 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 da? And the truth of the matter is that we all grieve very differently.
Right.
We all have different levels of comfortability when it comes to sharing these very, painful and private moments sometimes. And I know that this person is a more private person. And even though I know a lot about her, probably more than most people, um, I also know that this is a very, very painful, private moment for her. And so, what I did is she did reach out and let me know so and so had passed. And she said, I'll call you back. And since that time, I've just reached out to her to say, I'm thinking about you. I love you. And when you're ready to talk, I want you to know that I'm here.
That's perfect. That's
That,
perfect. That's all you can do because we can't, like you said before, we want to jump in and be a hero.
yeah,
And the truth is we can't change or fix it, and we shouldn't try to change or fix it because they really have to go through their process. And it's a process, like we said before, and and it's not fair for us to expect the other person to take, okay, and this is kind of goes into the workplace thing, like for example, employers will give someone who's had a loss like 3 to 5 days
mhm,
typically before they have to come back to work. And there's even some employers will not let you have time off depending, or less time off depending on the relationship you had with the person.
yeah,
So that's a really real thing. But yeah, we can't change or fix it, and it's not our jobs to. And but and I want to talk a little bit about the workplace, I guess, while I'm on the topic,
yeah,
because of that's a really harsh reality when you have to go back to work and you're there in body, but you're not there in mental, emotional, you're not really present yet. So coworkers, I think, really need to do a better job, and employers and bosses and managers need to do a better job of checking in with these people, because just because they've come back to work doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing okay.
right.
So I think we need, as a society, need to really handle that better in our workplace. So I have I have a business partner, so we affiliate with a mobile physician group and a rehab group and different groups. So it's a large company that I'm associated with. So I've implemented sort of an internal wellness program specifically for grief and loss, and especially because we're a healthcare system, we're dealing with other people's and other families' grief and loss, and
Mhm.
you know, it can be a lot. There's caregiver burnout, there's compassion burnout, fatigue, compassion fatigue, all of these things. So that's how I've approached it in our workplace, is I've sort of made those steps. And I think a lot of employers should maybe adopt something like that, whether it's giving more time off or ask your team, what they think would be appropriate, for something like that. But I also kind of wanted to touch on disenfranchised grief, maybe at this point too, if that's okay.
Of course.
Um, when my mom passed away, I just talked to my dad last night, and he reminded me about this story. I didn't even know this happened, but my dad was working. I don't want to name the employer. I totally should, but I won't. Um, but they gave my dad a really hard time for wanting time off because my mom was his ex-wife. My parents were divorced for several years by the time my mom got sick and died. Um, and they said, well, it's your ex-spouse. So what's, almost like looking at him like, what's the big deal? So disenfranchised grief is when society disenfranchises your grief because they don't think it's important enough. They don't think it's as relevant as losing an immediate partner or a child or, a parent or an immediate part of your unit. It could be an ex partner or spouse, or even, a miscarriage or infertility issues. Um, Even if you have a loved one with dementia or some sort of condition that is deteriorating the person and you need time off to deal with that. Divorce even can be one. So there's a lot of different types of grief. It's not always a death or a death of an immediate loved one. There's a lot of different things that as a society we should just be aware that these all deserve understanding and compassion and things like that. But yeah, they wouldn't give they did eventually, because he had to argue and things like that, because he had to essentially he had to take me to the services, and he said to the employer, what am I supposed to do, just let her take the bus to the funeral?
Wow.
Because yeah. And so that was just so, you know so crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things that I want to touch on is, you know, I know that we talked about one way to kind of let people know that they're there for you. Um, and I personally, and I'm sure you felt the same thing, after my mother passed, man, it was a whirlwind of people, right? They're at your door, they're bringing you food, they're bringing you cards, they're calling, they're everything, right? And then all of a sudden, the funeral happens. And then there's crickets. People
Wow.
get back to their everyday life.
Yes.
And what some people might not know because they haven't experienced it yet is that this is when grief really hits. Everything has calmed down and it's starting to fall on you, the weight of everything that has just happened. You've just been with this person. If it was a long-term terminal illness, you've been going through grief for, who knows, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years, because you know that it's imminent, it's going to happen. And then it happened, and then no one is there.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
the importance of continuing to reach out, even if it's once a week, just to say, hey, I'm here, you know, I think that's
So
so,
important.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and that's such a good thing to bring up. Yeah, it's that like 6 months later time,
Yeah,
roughly. Might not be exactly 6 months, but several months later. Yeah, most people have gone about their life.
yeah,
And, and like I said, I'm glad that you took advantage of a grief support group and a bereavement group, but a lot of people don't, and they go at it alone. Um, and it can feel like everybody's just kind of fallen off.
yeah,
Which is
absolutely.
Yeah, and that can be really, really disheartening. And we don't really and the thing is I think another thing people say is, call me if you need me, or if
Mhm.
there's anything I can do, let me know. But if you've ever been in that situation or are in that situation, you're not going to pick up the phone and likely say, and it's important to find somebody, though. I would say, just to the grieving person, to find a safe person,
Mhm.
like I think you are that person for your friend, that they can call and with no judgment, no expectation, try to have somebody like that.
Mhm.
Hopefully you do. And if not, then it could be a good idea to join a group and
Absolutely.
connect with people who, and there's different, groups for different types of losses. You could affiliate with a widowers support group. There's in your community, and
For
I'm
me,
reluctant
it
to
was a
say,
daughter's support
what
group.
what's
For
that?
for me, it was a daughter support group.
Yeah,
Daughters who had lost their mother. So there are these very specific groups. And it's
right.
funny because I've made lifelong connections. Now, we may not still be in contact all the time, but we have connected, whether it's just through Facebook or watching life happen through somebody else's Facebook, you see them pop up and you celebrate with them because you see that they've gotten through it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that. One of the ladies from my grief support group, she's quite a bit older than I am. She and, her son and I eventually ended up working together in the same school. And we just really connected. She and I had like this mother-daughter almost sort of energy between us. And she ended up taking me to a park one year, and we did a balloon release for our moms. You know what I mean? So those connections are very important.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I'm so glad that you brought up incorporating like a new ritual.
Yeah.
Because traditions can get so uprooted,
Yeah.
especially around the holidays, you
Yeah.
know. So there's some things that we can kind of talk about to incorporate into your new normal and try to normalize things a little bit during that time. I also have a friend who lost her mom tragically in a car accident. I went to high school with her, and she lost her mom on Thanksgiving Day.
Wow.
In a car accident. And this was only probably a couple of years after my mom had passed away. And she reached out to me and we met up. And she reached out to me because she knew that I had lost my mom and she didn't know really what to do or who to turn to. Or, I mean, it was very fresh. So every year on Thanksgiving, I think about her. We don't really talk anymore that much. But you know, if I shoot her a message, it just is so meaningful because she knows that I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, and kind of getting back to the holidays and those traditions, for my family, one thing that my mom always used to do, she let us open one gift and we always knew what it was going to be on Christmas Eve. And it was our pajamas. Like that was our thing. We all had Christmas pajamas. They weren't necessarily matching, but that was important for her. And so we've carried on that tradition. But I think also it's important to get unstuck to create some new traditions.
Exactly.
You know? So is there anything in your family that you've done or families that you've worked with that you've kind of been able to coach different ways to, cope or get through the holidays or to make it a little brighter?
Yeah, I think that's beautiful that you have kept with the tradition. I think for the first year, it's okay to just fall apart. I just want to say that too, because
Absolutely.
you might not be in a place where you're ready to really do much of anything. And like I said earlier, the holidays can be full of pressure
Yeah.
to perform and to just let's figure it out. So it just depends on where you're at. It's so unique for everybody that I hate to like blanket it, but I just want to kind of start there. But what I've seen is like lighting a candle for the person and setting a table for the person, especially for Thanksgiving or even your Christmas dinner, still setting a place setting for that person. Actually, my boyfriend, it wasn't for the holidays necessarily, but for his dad's birthday, he put out a pint of beer for his dad's birthday. And he'll do things like that, like set a place for his dad, and he won't. Then at the brewery, he won't let anyone sit there. That's because his dad's there.
That's so
And
neat.
and he doesn't care if people give him a weird look, and and neither should you, as the person doing it. This is everybody grieves differently, and there's no wrong, weird way to do it. I think it's really healthy. I think it's more unhealthy to just try to disown it.
Yes.
And deny it and push it down and try to pretend in some way, try to fake it. I think that's more damaging than anything. But yeah, or creating new traditions, it just depends on the family as far as new traditions go. Do you have any suggestions for that?
I know that the first year after my mom passed away, um, the grief was still just, I mean, it happened in May, and when December rolled around, it was just, like I said, that was her big season, So it was very hard for us that first year. And what we found was we needed to get away. So
Okay.
we did still do the pajamas. That was still incorporated. But what we did, we lived in Indiana at the time, and we just rented a cabin. Actually, no, a dear friend of my mom's, she actually used to work for the man. He gave us his cabin.
Oh, cool.
And it was on this beautiful lake. It was snowy outside. My aunt and uncle came in from, I don't know, I think they were living in Florida at the time, with their dog. And we just, we played games and we had dinner and we just enjoyed our time together. That was the essence of my mom. She just loved her family. And so we still did that, but we had to change the setting up a little bit.
Right.
And I just think that people need to know that that's okay. You aren't betraying her memory or his memory by changing things up a little bit. You have to find a way to get through this grief. And those little subtleties don't matter. Just know that they're still there.
Yeah. And not feeling obligated, because if you were the host every year for the last 15 years, I mean, there can feel this pressure that I have to still host and perform this year, and never feel obligated that you have to have a party. I think it's important that as a friend or family of someone who's grieving to reach out and invite them to a party, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
But don't expect them to show up.
Yeah.
Too. Reach out, extend the invitation, but be completely understanding if they say, you know what, I just really can't people today.
Yeah. And if they get there and realize I can't people today, make it as normal as anything for them to feel free to walk out.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot.
Yes.
It's definitely a lot.
Yeah.
Well, Ange, we're nearing the end. So is there anything you want to kind of say to wrap up?
Well, maybe just a little bit about how grief shows up in the body.
Yeah.
And, so my work as a massage therapist, I work with hospice patients, and also family caregivers who are grieving, either they're caregivers, there's caregiver stress overload, and then also after the loss itself. So, we can feel obviously pain if we've been crying a lot. It can show up sort of in our back, our shoulders, our neck. Sometimes we clench our jaw, kind of tight, and it can kind of cause headaches. There's something called grief brain, where you just feel like foggy, almost like you're drunk or, drugged a little bit. So it can kind of impair your memory, which again, employers need to kind of be aware of that. So if there's like little mistakes happening, it's like, just give them a break. Digestive issues, stomach issues, sleep, lack of sleep, insomnia, even nightmares can happen.
And massage can go a long way to help with those issues.
Yeah. So when we do the massage specifically for someone in grief, it's not necessarily to like massage out the muscles like it is in a traditional massage setting, although, there might be some dedicated time for more localized specific work, but really the goal is just to give the client a safe place to collapse, where there is absolutely nothing expected of them for that 60 or 90 minutes, where they can really feel safe and nurtured. They don't have to say anything. They don't have to explain anything. And I make it really clear that, I'm not a grief counselor. I'm focusing on how this grief is showing up in your body, and how I can support them that way. I make sure that I have tissues nearby, so if there is any sort of emotional release, they can feel safe with that, and they don't have to feel any sense of shame or embarrassment. I give them an opportunity if they need to take a break, to do so. But generally there's no talking, and it's just a really beautiful self-care practice for that person to develop. Much needed. Yeah, because society, we're forced to put on this the social mask, I call it, and to, I say, get back in line. You've been out of line all this time. Okay, it's time to get back in line, and you do have to. But so I intentionally create this space, and there are other therapists around the country who specifically do this work. There's not a lot, but the trainer I worked with is doing a really beautiful job of getting the word out there. And I think us as a society, we need to just talk about it and just not ignore it, and give people the space and the support that they need. Never assume anything.
Yeah. And
Too.
I will just say, watching you especially the last few months, you've just done a phenomenal job in trying to make this the new norm. Because the reality is, it's normal. We're all going to face this someday.
Thank
And the
you.
people we leave behind are going to face this someday. So we need to be better equipped. And you're doing your damnedest to make sure that we are better equipped. And thank you for that,
Thank
because
you.
it's so needed in our society in particular. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. I try to be the person that I wish I had 15 years ago. That's really my goal. I'm trying to be that person to other people. Um, it's just, just recognizing that, like you said, we're all gonna, with life comes death. With the privilege and opportunity to live, we also have to accept that one day we will die.
Mhm.
um, and I'm trying to just normalize death and grief, and for people, when they're ready. I've even had to have this talk with my own family several times, and I think it's finally getting easier. It's a process, though, I've noticed with a lot of people. um, but I think it's really needed, and I'm working hard in my community. So I'll talk about the workshop a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I have a workshop coming up at the Ohm Home in Broad Ripple
Yeah,
in
Robert.
Indianapolis. Yeah, and it's comforting touch for the dying. Um, and just kind of going, about the touch for hospice. I do this work too because touch at end of life is so important too. Touch for the patient, because a lot of people are afraid to touch someone who's really sick and frail because we're afraid to hurt them, or we don't really know if they want us to touch them. Maybe they're nonverbal. So a lot of my clients are at the end of life and they're nonverbal. So there are different cues to know of, if touch is welcomed or not welcomed. It's all about getting permission to touch, never assuming. But it can be as simple as holding someone's hand, all the way to a full body massage. So, I really love to educate caregivers at the bedside too about how to apply gentle touch. So, I have this workshop on November 24th. It's a Sunday from 11:11 until roughly 2:22. That's how they schedule all their things. And yeah, it's open for anybody. You don't have to have any experience. This is for all caregivers. Anyone interested in learning how to provide comfort touch at end of life is welcome. We're going to do some talk about, the fears a little bit. We're going to do a caregiver meditation just for them to feel a sense of empowerment. That's my main goal with all of this work, is to empower caregivers and families and patients. Let them know that they have a sense of control. We can't control everything.
Mhm.
God, at some point, or whoever your higher source is, really says the final say in when we go and what happens. But there is a lot that we can control, or we have options for, I should say. So it's really giving people their power back is my main focus with all of the work that I do, making sure people have options and have resources and can feel well equipped, because 50, 100 years ago, people died at home.
Yeah.
They didn't die in skilled nursing facilities and hospitals. It wasn't as medicalized as it is today. So I think there's a big push to bring death and dying back home to the family. And and teaching children, too, how to care for someone at end of life, and normalizing it for kids too. And that's part of my mission as well, because I think if we teach them young, they'll grow up and eventually be an adult who has to face this, and they'll be much better equipped.
So glad you mentioned that, because I remember specifically my niece and nephew at the time my mom passed away. We were just like, how do we explain any of this to them? Whether it was her getting the diagnosis, or, being sent home for the final time from Cancer Treatment Centers of America saying there's nothing more we can do. Like, how do we break this down to, a 4 and a 5-year-old level?
Yeah.
So that's really important work.
Yeah. And it's meeting the kid wherever, whatever is age appropriate for where they are. So like 4 or 5 years old, they're probably not going to really understand the finality of death and that it's permanent.
Mm-hmm.
You might say to a child, grandma has died, and they might look at you and say, well, when is she coming back? Or, they might have some response that really shows that they don't understand the significance. So I've heard, people say, her body has stopped working.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to bring children to funerals. A lot of people, I went through this with my little brother, and I wish I knew now, wish I knew then what I know now. And I wish I would have really involved my little brother more
Mm-hmm.
in the whole, especially the funeral and that ritual of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have so many awesome tools that I like to share with families that I wish I had
Yeah.
back then. But involving kids, definitely don't lie. Definitely don't say they're sleeping. I mean, or that they've gone to heaven, or they've disappeared, or because that can really make it even more scary for kids. So trying to be honest, but meeting them where they are, that's age appropriate. And
Okay.
there's a lot of resources and tools you can find. I would definitely suggest getting kids into counseling. Absolutely. Professional counseling.
Awesome. And you and I have talked just briefly about some different ways that you've helped families who, might not have a ton of money to invest, because funerals, I don't know what the current number is, but I'm guessing it's somewhere between $15,000 and
It
$20,000.
can be,
Yeah.
which
Um,
is just crazy.
it's bananas. So, you mentioned to me there are some really creative and beautiful ways that you can have a funeral,
Yeah,
and still, without having to go through cremation or anything like that, you can
I
still
know.
have a
I,
quote unquote normal funeral.
I know. I'd love to do a talk on that sometime.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, there are things that we can do. And I was having a conversation with my dad last night about that. Luckily, he's really open to this stuff. And my dad's a very financially savvy man, so I know that he can appreciate it. And I think especially for our parents, my parents, they don't want us spending exorbitant amounts of money on their funeral. So we talked about green burial,
Hmm.
um, which can be such a beautiful ritual.
Hmm.
It's definitely, um, what I want people to know is that the amount of money that you spend does not directly correlate with how much you love the person,
Right.
right? And unfortunately, the funeral industry, it's a business,
Yeah.
and they're out to make money. And so again, empowering people, because we're all consumers essentially, in our life and also in our death. So yeah, I'd love to do a talk about some things like that in the future. But if anybody has questions, I would love to talk to them, no matter what state you're in, actually, because um, every state's a little different, but I might be able to provide people with some guidance or just some ideas, because most states now have um, cemeteries that are natural burial, and there are definitely ways to save money and to do things in a more, and I think it's not about necessarily saving money as much as having more family involvement in the ceremony itself.
Absolutely. Well, first, I want to thank you so much for taking almost an hour out of your day to share with us about. I mean, I've been with you on this journey for a number of years now, so I know that the amount of knowledge that you have. It took you a long time to get that and to work through. So thank you for that. And for anyone else who is watching who would like to get in touch with Angela, again, the name of her company is My Massage and Wellness. The workshop that she's doing is at Home in Broad Ripple, which is kind of a subset of Indianapolis. So anyone in the Indianapolis area, feel free to register for that. And how do they register?
Through the website, or I think they can, I mean, I prefer that they pre-register because the space is limited to like 10 or 12 people. I believe they can register through the Home's website, which I don't know if I have her card on me. I might. Actually, I do. It is Home, OMHOME.world.
.world. Okay. So OMHOME.world is where you can register for that workshop. It's on November 24th from 11:11 until approximately 2:22. And anyone who wants to reach out to Angela directly can reach her at angela@mymassageandwellnessllc.com. Or you can reach her at 317-954-0977. She does do direct work with the community. So she does do gentle touch massage for people who are going through either a terminal illness or, the death process. And then she also does grief massage for people who are going through the grieving process. She also does work as an end-of-life doula. So for any of those services, you can certainly reach out to her and she would be happy to give you some more information. So thank you again, Ange. Love you.
Thank you. I love you too. This was so fun.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all. And we'll see you on the next episode of Real Talk with Amber.